The dust kicked up around her worn boots as Beatrice Jones watched the stagecoach pull away from the Holbrook depot for the third time in as many months. Her supposed fiancé nowhere in sight, despite his promises in every letter. She stood there with her single leather trunk, feeling the Arizona sun beat down on her shoulders while other passengers were greeted by loved ones, and she wondered if this was what being forgotten felt like. Over and over again, until the feeling became as familiar as breathing. Lucas Sawyer had been loading supplies onto his wagon across the dusty street when he noticed her, the same young woman who had arrived at that depot twice before with hope shining in her eyes, only to have it dim as the hours passed, and no one came to claim her. He had watched from a distance those other times, seeing how she would eventually pay for a room at the boarding house with money she probably could not afford to spend, her posture growing more defeated with each visit. This time, something in him stirred differently. Maybe it was the way she held her chin up despite everything, or maybe it was simply that he could not stand to see someone left behind one more time. He finished securing the last crate of grain and wiped his hands on his denim pants before crossing the street. His boots made soft thuds in the dirt as he approached, his shadow falling across her before his voice did. "Miss, I do not mean to intrude, but I have seen you here before." Beatrice turned, her hazel eyes meeting his blue ones with a mixture of embarrassment and weariness. She was 22 years old, and had traveled all the way from Missouri on the promise of marriage to a man named Gerald Hutchins, who worked as a clerk in Holbrook, and had sent her beautiful letters full of poetry and promises. Each time she arrived, he sent word through the station master that urgent business had kept him away, that she should wait just a bit longer, that next time would be different. "I suppose I am becoming a fixture here," she said, trying to inject some humor into her voice but failing. Rather like the hitching posts. Lucas removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair that was slightly too long, touching his collar. He was 26 and had been working his ranch alone for 3 years since his father passed. "I do not think you are anything like a hitching post, miss. Those serve a purpose and they get used. You, on the other hand, are being left to weather for no good reason." She appreciated his directness even as it stung. "My fiancé is a busy man." 3 times busy seems less like a man and more like an excuse, Lucas said, then caught himself. "Forgive me, that was too forward. I am Lucas Sawyer. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside town." "Beatrice Jones," she replied, accepting his extended hand for a brief shake. His palm was calloused and warm, honest in a way that made her chest ache. "And you are right, though it pains me to admit it. I have been writing to Gerald for 8 months. Every letter painted such beautiful pictures of our life together here." Lucas glanced toward the setting sun, then back at her. "It will be dark soon. I assume you will be staying at Mrs. Harrington's boarding house again." "I have enough for 2 nights, Beatrice admitted quietly. "After that, I suppose I will need to find work or book passage back to Missouri, though I have no family there anymore. My parents passed last year, which is why I was so eager to start fresh here." Something in her honesty made Lucas's chest tighten. He had known loneliness himself, had felt the weight of empty rooms and silent dinners. His ranch was successful enough, his cattle healthy and his land productive, but none of it meant much when there was no one to share it with. He had courted a girl once before his father died, but she had married a banker in Flagstaff instead, wanting the security of town life over the uncertainty of ranching. "I have a proposition," he said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "I need help at the ranch. Cooking, mending, keeping the house. The work is honest and I can offer room and board plus a small wage. It would give you time to sort out your situation without depleting your savings." Beatrice studied him carefully. He did not look like the kind of man who made offers lightly. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. His clothes were clean but worn, practical rather than fine. Everything about him spoke of hard work and integrity. "I do not want charity," she said firmly. "And I do not want to keep eating my own terrible cooking," Lucas replied with a slight smile. "This would be a fair arrangement. You would earn your keep." She looked down at her trunk, at the depot behind her, at the town of Holbrook stretching out in the fading light. Somewhere in one of these buildings was Gerald Hutchins, the man who had promised her everything and delivered nothing. She could wait for him again, spend her precious money on another room, hope that this time would be different. Or she could accept the offer from this stranger who at least had the decency to show up and speak plainly. "How do I know you are honorable?" she asked, meeting his eyes directly. "You do not," Lucas admitted, "but Mrs. Harrington has known me since I was a boy. We can stop by her place first, and she will tell you I am no scoundrel. You can make your decision after that." The fact that he understood her caution and did not take offense to it made Beatrice's decision easier. "All right, let us speak with Mrs. Harrington." Lucas picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing and carried it to his wagon. Beatrice followed, her heart beating faster with a mixture of anxiety and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. She climbed onto the wagon seat beside him, keeping a proper distance, and they rode the short way to the boarding house in comfortable silence. Mrs. Harrington was a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She stepped onto her porch when she heard the wagon, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lucas Sawyer, are you finally bringing me that payment for the preserves?" "I have it right here, Mrs. Harrington," Lucas said, pulling a small pouch from his pocket and handing it to her. "And I was hoping you might speak with Miss Jones here about my character." Mrs. Harrington's expression softened when she saw Beatrice. "Oh, honey, he did not show up again, did he? That Gerald Hutchins is all talk and no substance. I could have told you that from the start." "I am learning that now," Beatrice said quietly. "Mr. Sawyer has offered me employment at his ranch. I wanted to ensure he is trustworthy before accepting." Mrs. Harrington looked between them, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "Lucas is one of the good ones. His father raised him right before the fever took him. He works hard, pays his debts, and I have never heard an ill word about his character. If he says he will treat you with respect, he will." "Thank you," Beatrice said, feeling tension ease from her shoulders. "That said, Mrs. Harrington continued, turning to Lucas, "you make sure there is proper propriety out at that ranch. This young woman's reputation matters." "Yes, madam," Lucas replied seriously. "I will sleep in the barn." Mrs. Harrington nodded approvingly. "See that you do. And Beatrice, you come to town any time you need anything. Plenty of us here who will look out for you." With that settled, Lucas and Beatrice continued out of town as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The road to his ranch was rough but well maintained, cutting through scrubland dotted with juniper and pinyon pines. In the distance, red rock formations rose against the darkening sky, ancient and steadfast. "It is beautiful country," Beatrice said softly, the first to break their silence. "It grows on you," Lucas agreed. "When I first moved here with my father, I missed the green of Texas, but there is something about this land. It is honest. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is." Beatrice appreciated that sentiment more than he could know. She had spent months corresponding with a man who had apparently been pretending all along, crafting a fiction in ink while she built her entire future around his words. The ranch appeared as they crested a small rise. It was modest but well kept, with a sturdy house built from lumber and stone, a barn that looked newly repaired, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in a fenced pasture, dark shapes against the twilight. Lucas pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Beatrice down before retrieving her trunk. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. A simple table with 2 chairs sat near the window. Lucas showed her to a small bedroom off the main room, which had a narrow bed with a faded quilt and a dresser with a cracked mirror. "It is not much," he said, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "But the roof does not leak, and the bed is comfortable." "It is more than sufficient," Beatrice replied, running her hand over the quilt. It was handmade, the stitching careful and even. "Did your mother make this?" "My grandmother," Lucas said, a hint of warmth in his voice. "She passed before we moved here, but my father brought her quilts with us. Said they made any place feel like home." Beatrice felt the weight of that history, the love stitched into every piece of fabric. "Thank you for letting me use it." Lucas nodded and retreated to the main room. "I will make something to eat, nothing fancy, but it will fill you up." She joined him in the kitchen area, watching as he built up the fire in the stove and pulled out supplies. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had been caring for himself for a long time, but she could see he was right about his cooking skills. He was about to dump beans directly into a pot without soaking them first. "May I?" Beatrice asked gently, stepping forward. Lucas looked relieved. "Please. I usually just eat whatever does not burn too badly." She took over the meal preparation, finding dried beans that needed soaking, some salted pork and vegetables that were past their prime but still usable. Within an hour, she had created a simple but hearty stew, along with cornbread that baked in the oven. Lucas watched her work with undisguised appreciation, realizing just how much he had been missing the comfort of a home-cooked meal. They ate at the table, the lamplight casting warm shadows around the room. Outside, coyotes called to each other in the darkness, a sound Beatrice was still getting used to. "This is the best meal I have had in years," Lucas said honestly, sopping up the last of his stew with cornbread. "You have already earned your keep for a week." Beatrice smiled, the first real smile since arriving in Holbrook. "I am glad I can contribute. My mother was an excellent cook. She made sure I learned everything she knew." "Tell me about her," Lucas said, leaning back in his chair, so Beatrice did. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her father who had worked as a carpenter and her mother who had taken in sewing to help make ends meet. She spoke of how the fever had taken them both within a week of each other, leaving her alone in a town where she had no close relatives. She explained how Gerald's letters had arrived at just the right time, offering her a new beginning when she desperately needed one. "I should have known it was too perfect," she admitted, staring into her empty bowl. "The poetry, the promises. Real life is never that simple." "No, it is not," Lucas agreed. "But you deserve someone who shows up, who does not leave you standing at a depot wondering if you matter." His words, spoken with such quiet conviction, made her eyes sting with unshed tears. She blinked them back. "What about you, Mrs.? Harrington said your father passed. Have you been alone since then?" Lucas nodded. 3 years now. The fever took him quick. One day he was fine, the next he was burning up, and 3 days later he was gone. I thought about selling the ranch, moving somewhere with more people. But this land, this life, it is all I know, all I have left of him." "I understand that," Beatrice said softly, wanting to hold onto what remains. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had both known loss finding unexpected understanding in each other's company. Finally, Lucas stood and began gathering the dishes. "You cooked, so I will clean," he said. "And then I will get settled in the barn. There are extra blankets in the chest by the fireplace if you get cold. Nights can be chilly even in summer." "Lucas," Beatrice said, stopping him before he could turn away. "Thank you for noticing me today, for offering me a choice." His eyes met hers and something passed between them, a recognition of shared loneliness and the fragile beginning of something new. "You are welcome, Beatrice." That first night, Beatrice lay in the narrow bed under her grandmother's quilt and felt safer than she had in months. Outside, she could hear the soft sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the trees. In the barn, Lucas made a bed in the hay loft, staring up at the gaps in the roof where stars shone through, wondering what exactly he had started by bringing her here. The next morning, Beatrice woke before dawn to the sound of Lucas moving around outside. She dressed quickly in one of her simple day dresses and found him already back from checking on the cattle, drawing water from the well. His hair was damp, and she realized he had washed up before coming near the house, maintaining that proper distance Mrs. Harrington had insisted upon. "Morning," he said, setting the bucket down. "I hope I did not wake you." "I am used to rising early," Beatrice replied, taking the bucket from him. "I will start breakfast." She made flapjacks and coffee, using the last of the eggs from his small chicken coop. Lucas ate like a man who rarely had a full breakfast, savoring every bite. Afterward, he showed her around the ranch properly in the morning light. The property was larger than she had realized, stretching out across several hundred acres of grazing land. Lucas ran about 200 head of cattle, which he explained was modest compared to some of the bigger operations, but enough to make a decent living. He pointed out the irrigation system his father had built to keep a kitchen garden alive, though it had fallen into neglect since Lucas had been managing everything alone. "I have not had time to keep it up," he admitted, looking at the overgrown plot. "But if you wanted to try bringing it back, we could have fresh vegetables again." Beatrice surveyed the garden, already mentally planning what could be salvaged and what needed to be replanted. "I would like that. My mother always said a good garden was the backbone of a good home." They fell into a routine over the following days that felt both strange and natural. Beatrice would rise early and prepare breakfast while Lucas handled the morning cattle check. They would eat together. Then Lucas would head out to mend fences or move cattle while Beatrice tackled the housework and garden. She discovered that the house had been thoroughly neglected in the years since Lucas's father died, not dirty exactly, but lacking the small touches that made it a home. She washed curtains that had not been cleaned in years, aired out closets, and organized the pantry. In the evenings, they would share dinner and conversation, each learning more about the other in careful increments. Lucas discovered that Beatrice had a quick wit and a sharp mind, that she could discuss everything from politics to poetry with equal ease. She had been educated at a small school in Missouri and had hoped to become a teacher before her parents died and financial necessity changed her plans. She loved reading and would often sit by the fire in the evenings with one of the worn books from Lucas's small collection, her face peaceful in the lamplight. Beatrice learned that Lucas was quieter than most men she had known, but thoughtful. He would often pause before speaking, choosing his words carefully. He was knowledgeable about ranching and the land, could track animals by their prints, and had a gift for working with horses. He had a gentle touch with the animals that surprised her, speaking to them in low, soothing tones. He was also deeply lonely, though he tried to hide it. She would sometimes catch him watching her as she worked, a look of wonder on his face as though he could not quite believe she was there. 2 weeks into her stay, Beatrice was in town buying supplies when she encountered Gerald Hutchins. She recognized him immediately from the photograph he had sent, though he looked softer and less impressive in person. He was standing outside the general store, laughing with 2 other men when he spotted her. "Beatrice," he said, his smile faltering. "I thought you were not arriving until next month." She stared at him, the anger she had been suppressing finally rising to the surface. "Next month? Gerald, I have been here 3 times. 3 times I waited at that depot while you sent excuses." He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "There were complications. Work obligations. I meant to explain in my next letter." "You meant to keep stringing me along," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the fury in her chest. "I traveled halfway across the country based on your promises. I gave up everything for a life you never intended to give me." One of the men with Gerald snickered, and Gerald's face flushed red. "Now, Beatrice, you are being dramatic. If you would just be reasonable." "I am done being reasonable," she replied. "I am done waiting. Consider our engagement ended, not that it was ever real to begin with." She turned and walked away, her head high, leaving Gerald sputtering behind her. Her hands were shaking as she entered the general store, but she felt lighter than she had in months. Mrs. Harrington was inside purchasing thread, and she took one look at Beatrice's face and pulled her aside. "You ran into him," she said knowingly. "I did, and I ended it." Beatrice took a shaky breath. "I should have done it the first time he left me waiting." "Better late than never, Mrs. Harrington said firmly. "That boy has always been full of himself. You are well rid of him." "How are things at the Sawyer ranch?" "Good," Beatrice said, and realized she meant it. "Lucas is kind. The work is honest. I feel useful there." Mrs. Harrington's eyes twinkled. "Lucas is a good man. Deserves someone who appreciates him." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "We have a working arrangement, nothing more." "Of course," Mrs. Harrington said, but her tone suggested she did not believe that for a moment. "Still, no harm in noticing a good man when you see one." When Beatrice returned to the ranch, Lucas was repairing a section of fence near the house. He saw her wagon approaching and set down his tools, walking over to help her unload the supplies. He noticed immediately that something had changed. "Are you all right?" he asked, carrying a sack of flour toward the house. "I saw Gerald in town," Beatrice said, following with a smaller parcel. "I told him our engagement was over." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her. "How do you feel about that?" She considered the question seriously. "Relieved. Angry that I wasted so much time, but mostly relieved." "Good," Lucas said simply. "He did not deserve you." The certainty in his voice made her heart skip. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Lucas replied, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I know you work hard. I know you are brave enough to travel across the country alone. I know you make this place feel like a home again. That is more than enough." They stood there in the afternoon sun, supplies hanging forgotten in their hands, something unspoken passing between them. Then Lucas cleared his throat and continued toward the house, and the moment broke, but its echo remained. As summer deepened into full heat, the ranch thrived under their combined efforts. The garden produced tomatoes, beans, and squash. The cattle were fat and healthy. The house was cleaner and more comfortable than it had been in years. But more than the physical improvements, there was a warmth between Lucas and Beatrice that neither could ignore, though both tried. They would work side by side in the garden, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same tool. Lucas would come in from the fields and find her mending his shirts, her fingers quick and sure with the needle, and feel something tighten in his chest. Beatrice would watch him with the horses, seeing the gentleness in his touch, and wonder what it would feel like to be touched that way herself. One evening in late July, a storm rolled in across the desert, bringing with it spectacular lightning and much-needed rain. They stood on the porch together, watching the display, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Beatrice instinctively moved closer to Lucas. "I have never seen lightning like this," she said, watching forks of electricity split the sky. Desert storms are something else, Lucas agreed. He was acutely aware of her shoulder nearly touching his, of the way the wind pulled strands of her hair loose from its pins. Beautiful and dangerous at the same time. She looked up at him, rain beginning to fall in fat drops around them. Like most things worth having, I suppose. Lucas met her eyes, and for a moment he almost closed the distance between them, almost pulled her into his arms and kissed her the way he had been wanting to for weeks. But then another crack of thunder made them both jump, and the moment passed. They retreated inside, the air between them charged with more than just the storm. That night, Lucas lay in the barn loft unable to sleep, listening to the rain drum on the roof. He thought about Beatrice sleeping in the house, warm and safe under his grandmother's quilt. He thought about how much his life had changed since that day at the depot, how much lighter his burden felt with someone to share it. He was falling in love with her, had probably been falling since the moment she looked at him with those honest hazel eyes and asked if he was honorable. But he did not know what to do about it. She had come here running from one failed engagement. How could he burden her with his feelings when she was still finding her footing? She worked for him, depended on him for her livelihood and shelter. It would not be fair to put her in a position where she felt obligated to return his affections. So he stayed silent, loving her from a distance, hoping that she might somehow feel the same but terrified to find out. Beatrice, in her own bed, was wrestling with similar thoughts. She had not expected to feel this way again, certainly not so soon after Gerald's betrayal. But what she felt for Lucas was nothing like what she had felt for Gerald. That had been based on beautiful letters and imagined futures. This was based on shared meals and honest work. On the way, Lucas listened when she spoke and remembered small details about her life. It was in how he had given her space to be angry about Gerald, had not tried to tell her how to feel or push her to move on before she was ready. It was in 1,000 small kindnesses that added up to something bigger than she had words for. But she was afraid too. Afraid of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong person. Afraid that what she felt might not be real, might just be gratitude disguised as affection. Afraid that Lucas saw her only as an employee, someone useful but nothing more. So she too stayed silent, and the summer stretched on with both of them loving quietly and speaking not at all. In August, a group of cattle rustlers hit several ranches in the area. Lucas's neighbor, Tom Fletcher, lost 50 head in a single night. The ranchers organized patrols, taking turns watching over each other's property. Lucas would ride out at sunset and not return until dawn, exhausted and worried. Beatrice would wait up for him despite her own early mornings, making sure he had hot coffee and food when he returned. "You do not need to do this," Lucas said one morning, coming in just after sunrise to find her already up, breakfast waiting. "You should be resting." "I rest better knowing you have come home safe," Beatrice replied, pouring him coffee. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you eat properly." Lucas sat heavily at the table, his rifle propped against the wall beside him. He had been up for nearly 24 hours, and it showed in the lines around his eyes. "I do not know how much longer we can keep this up. We all have our own work to do. We cannot spend every night patrolling. Have you thought about going to the marshal?" The marshal is one man trying to cover hundreds of square miles. By the time he arrives, the rustlers are long gone. Lucas rubbed his face tiredly. "Tom is talking about hiring guns, but none of us can really afford that." Beatrice sat across from him, worry clear on her face. The thought of Lucas out there in the dark, potentially facing dangerous men, made her stomach clench with fear. "Please be careful." He looked at her, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes, and felt that familiar tightness in his chest. I will. I have reasons to be careful now." Their eyes held for a long moment before Lucas looked away, standing to take his dishes to the wash basin. Beatrice wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to tell him that she had reasons to want him safe too, but fear kept her silent once again. The rustler problem resolved itself 2 weeks later, when Tom Fletcher and another rancher caught 3 men trying to cut out cattle from a shared grazing area. There was a brief exchange of gunfire that left one rustler wounded and the other 2 fleeing. The wounded man was handed over to the marshal, and he gave up his partner's names in exchange for lenient treatment. The marshal and a posse tracked down the remaining rustlers, and the raid stopped. The relief among the ranching community was palpable. Tom Fletcher organized a barn dance at his property to celebrate, inviting all the ranchers and their families. Lucas mentioned it to Beatrice over dinner one evening, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "We do not have to go if you would rather not," he said. "I know you have been working hard." Beatrice set down her fork, considering. She had not been to a social gathering since arriving in Holbrook, had been so focused on the ranch and sorting out her feelings that she had isolated herself. But suddenly the idea of music and dancing, of seeing Lucas in a setting other than work, appealed to her. "I think it would be nice," she said. "If you want to go." "I do," Lucas replied, perhaps too quickly. Then, more carefully, "It would be good for people to see us. Together, I mean. As friends, so there is no gossip about you staying here." "Of course," Beatrice said, trying to ignore the small stab of disappointment at the word friends. "For propriety." The night of the dance, Beatrice wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She had not had occasion to wear it since arriving in Arizona, and she felt almost like a different person as she smoothed the skirts and checked her reflection in the small mirror. She had pinned her hair up carefully, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. When she emerged from her room, Lucas was waiting by the door in clean trousers and a white shirt he had clearly ironed himself, though not very successfully. His hair was combed back and he had shaved. He turned when he heard her, and his expression made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They rode to the Fletcher ranch in Lucas's wagon as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Other wagons were already there, and music drifted out from the open barn doors. Tom Fletcher greeted them warmly, shaking Lucas's hand and welcoming Beatrice. "Good to see you, Miss Jones. I heard you gave Gerald Hutchins his walking papers. Good for you. That boy needed taking down a peg." Tom's wife, Sarah, swept Beatrice away to meet the other women while Lucas joined the men discussing cattle prices and weather predictions. The barn had been cleared and decorated with lanterns, and a small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar in one corner. Children ran underfoot while adults gathered in clusters, talking and laughing. It was warm and welcoming, and Beatrice found herself relaxing as Sarah, and the other women included her in their conversation. "Lucas looks happier than we have seen him in years," Sarah observed, watching Lucas across the barn. "You have been good for him." "We just worked together," Beatrice said, the familiar refrain. Another woman, Martha Chen, whose husband ran a neighboring ranch, smiled knowingly. "Honey, I have seen the way that man looks at you. That is not how a boss looks at his employee." Beatrice's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "Like you hung the moon and stars," Martha said simply. "Like he cannot quite believe his good fortune." Before Beatrice could respond, the music shifted to a lively reel, and couples began moving to the center of the barn to dance. Lucas appeared at her elbow, looking nervous. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Beatrice placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as they closed gently around hers. "I would." He led her onto the floor and pulled her into the dance. Lucas was not a graceful dancer, but he was confident, and he held her with a sureness that made her feel safe. They moved together through the steps, spinning and turning with the other couples. Every time his hand pressed against her back, every time their eyes met, Beatrice felt that pull between them growing stronger. They danced several more songs, breathless and laughing by the end. When a slower waltz began, Lucas pulled her closer, his hand warm at her waist. They moved together more naturally now, fitting against each other in a way that felt inevitable. "I am glad we came," Lucas said softly, his breath stirring the hair near her temple. "So am I," Beatrice replied, allowing herself to lean into him slightly. For these few moments, with music playing and lantern lights soft around them, she let herself pretend that they were not just employer and employee, not just two lonely people finding comfort in proximity. She let herself imagine that he felt the same way she did. Lucas was thinking similar thoughts as he guided her through the waltz. Holding her like this, feeling her hand in his and her body close to his own, was both wonderful and torturous. He wanted to tell her how he felt, wanted to ask if she might consider staying permanently, not as an employee but as something more. But fear held his tongue. What if she said no? What if he had misread everything and she was simply being kind to a lonely rancher who had offered her work? As the evening wore on, they alternated between dancing and socializing with the other ranchers. Beatrice felt herself being slowly absorbed into the community, these people who worked the hard land and looked out for each other. She felt at home in a way she had not expected, and when she looked at Lucas laughing with Tom Fletcher, she felt a fierce surge of belonging. Near midnight, they began the journey home. Beatrice was pleasantly tired, her feet sore from dancing but her spirit light. Lucas drove the wagon with relaxed confidence, occasionally pointing out constellations in the clear desert sky. "Thank you for tonight," Beatrice said as they neared the ranch. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be part of something." "You are part of this," Lucas said, then hesitated before adding, "part of this ranch, this life, if you want to be." She looked at him in the moonlight, trying to read his expression. "Lucas, what are we doing?" He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, his hands tight on the reins. "What do you mean, this arrangement?" Beatrice said, her courage finally overcoming her fear. "We both know I earn my keep 10 times over with the work I do. We both know you could sleep in the house and I would be perfectly safe. We dance around each other, careful and polite, but there is something else here. Is not there?" Lucas sat very still, his heart pounding. This was the moment. He could deflect, could maintain the careful distance they had established, or he could be honest and risk everything. "Yes," he said finally, turning to face her. "There is something else. For me, at least. I have been trying not to say anything because I did not want you to feel pressured. You work for me, you depend on me, and I did not want to put you in a position where you felt you had to return my feelings." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, relieved tears. "And what are your feelings?" Lucas took a shaky breath. "I am falling in love with you, Beatrice. Maybe have been since the day I saw you at that depot. So determined to hold your head high even when the world kept knocking you down. I love the way you sing while you cook, the way you stand with your hands on your hips when you are planning something, the way you make this empty house feel like a home. I love your strength and your kindness and your sharp mind. I love all of it, all of you." A tear slipped down Beatrice's cheek. "I thought it was just me. I thought I was being foolish, falling for someone so soon after Gerald, but this is nothing like that. What I feel for you is real and solid and true. I love you too, Lucas. I think I have for weeks now." Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face gently with his hand, wiping away her tear with his thumb. "You are sure? I need to know you are sure, because once I kiss you, I am not going to want to stop loving you. Not ever." "I am sure," Beatrice whispered. He leaned in and kissed her softly, tentatively, as though she were something precious that might break. But when she kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where his heart hammered, the gentleness gave way to passion. It was a kiss full of all the longing they had been suppressing, all the careful words left unsaid finally finding expression. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Do you want a home with me? Not as my employee, but as my wife?" "I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait longer, but I am tired of sleeping in that barn. I am tired of pretending I do not want to spend every moment with you. I want to build a life together, a real life." Beatrice laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes, yes, I want a home with you. I want all of it." They kissed again, softer this time, sealing the promise. Then Lucas helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the house, his arm around her waist. At the door, he kissed her once more before reluctantly pulling away. "I should still sleep in the barn," he said, though his voice was strained. "Until we are married, I want to do this right." "We will go see the preacher tomorrow," Beatrice said, reaching up to touch his face. "I have already waited long enough for my life to begin. I do not want to wait any more." True to her word, they rode into Holbrook the next morning and spoke with Reverend Matthews, who agreed to marry them the following Sunday. It was a short engagement by any standard, but no one who saw them together doubted their feelings. Mrs. Harrington declared herself delighted and immediately began organizing a small reception at the church. "I knew it," she said, beaming at them both. "The moment Lucas brought you to my door, I knew this would happen. You two are meant for each other." The week before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Beatrice sewed herself a simple white dress while Lucas cleaned and organized the house, moving his belongings from the barn back into the bedroom that had been his father's. Several of the neighbor women stopped by to offer gifts and advice, welcoming Beatrice officially into their community. On Sunday morning, Lucas stood at the front of Holbrook's small church, wearing his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his hands shaking slightly with nerves and anticipation. Tom Fletcher stood beside him as his witness, grinning broadly. The church was fuller than Lucas had expected. Neighbors and townsfolk who had come to see the quiet rancher finally find happiness. Then the doors opened, and Beatrice walked down the aisle on the arm of Mrs. Harrington, who had offered to stand in as family. Beatrice wore her white dress with a simple veil, her hair adorned with wildflowers from the ranch. She was radiant, her eyes locked on Lucas's as she walked toward him, toward their future. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. When it came time for the vows, Lucas took both of Beatrice's hands in his voice steady despite his emotions. "I promise to love you and honor you all the days of my life. I promise to be there when you need me and to give you space when you need that instead. I promise to never leave you waiting at any depot, literal or otherwise. I promise to build a home with you, a life with you, whatever that looks like." Beatrice was crying openly now, happy tears that she did not bother to hide. "I promise to love you and support you in all things. I promise to make our house a home, to work beside you in building our life. I promise to never take for granted the gift of being chosen by you, of choosing you in return. I promise to be your partner, your companion, your love, for as long as we both shall live. By the power vested in me," Reverend Matthews said, smiling, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Lucas, you may kiss your bride." Lucas pulled Beatrice close and kissed her deeply, and the small church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, married, beginning their life together officially at last. The reception at the church was simple but joyful. Mrs. Harrington had organized food, and someone brought a fiddle for music. Beatrice danced with Lucas, her new husband, and felt complete in a way she had never experienced. This was real, this love, this commitment. This was worth all the difficult journeys and disappointments that had led her here. As the afternoon wore on, Lucas and Beatrice finally took their leave, eager to begin their life together privately. They rode back to the ranch in the wagon, but this time when Beatrice reached for Lucas's hand, he took it openly, lacing his fingers through hers. "Are you happy?" he asked, glancing at her. "Happier than I knew I could be," Beatrice replied honestly. "Are you?" "I feel like the luckiest man alive," Lucas said. "You could have stayed at that depot, could have waited for Gerald, could have gone back to Missouri. Instead, you took a chance on me." "You gave me a choice when I had none," Beatrice reminded him. "You saw me when I felt invisible. That is not something I will ever forget." At the ranch, Lucas helped Beatrice down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her across the threshold of their home. He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood there for a moment, suddenly shy despite everything they had said and promised. "I should start dinner," Beatrice said softly. "Later," Lucas replied, pulling her close. "Right now I just want to hold my wife." They swayed together in the quiet house, no music but the sound of their heartbeats and the wind outside. Then Lucas kissed her, and shy gave way to passion, and they made their way to the bedroom that was now theirs together. They loved each other thoroughly and tenderly, learning the language of each other's bodies, sealing their commitment in the most intimate way. Afterward, they lay tangled together under Lucas's grandmother's quilt, Beatrice's head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting golden patterns on the walls. "Tell me about your dreams," Lucas said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "What do you want our life to be?" Beatrice considered the question, feeling safe and loved in a way that made dreaming feel possible. "I want this ranch to thrive. I want to expand the garden, maybe keep bees for honey. I want children someday if we are blessed with them. I want to grow old with you, building something lasting." "That sounds perfect," Lucas murmured. "I want all of that too. I want to give you everything I can, Beatrice. I am not a rich man, but I will work hard for us." "I know you will," she said, tilting her head to kiss his jaw. "And I will work beside you. We will build this life together." They stayed in bed until hunger finally drove them up. Beatrice made dinner in her nightgown while Lucas watched from the table, a sight so domestic and intimate it made his chest ache with happiness. They ate and talked and laughed, then returned to bed to love each other again, slower this time, learning what made each other gasp and sigh with pleasure. The first months of their marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small irritations and greater joys of sharing a life. Lucas discovered that Beatrice was not a morning person, that she needed coffee and quiet before she was ready to face the day. Beatrice learned that Lucas worried more than he let on, that he would sometimes lie awake at night thinking about rain and cattle prices, and all the things that could go wrong on a ranch. They argued occasionally, as all couples do. Once about money, when Beatrice wanted to spend extra on seeds for the garden and Lucas worried about having enough for winter supplies. Once about Lucas working himself too hard, pushing through exhaustion until Beatrice forced him to rest. But they learned to fight fair, to listen to each other's concerns, to compromise and apologize when necessary, Through it all, their love deepened and matured. The passion of their early days settled into something steadier but no less intense. Lucas would come in from the fields and find Beatrice kneading bread, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude that she was his. Beatrice would wake in the night and feel Lucas's arm around her, and know with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. In December, as the Arizona winter brought cooler temperatures and occasional frost, Beatrice realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before finally sharing her suspicion with Lucas one evening as they sat by the fire. "I think I might be with child," she said quietly, watching his face for his reaction. Lucas's eyes widened, then filled with such pure joy that Beatrice felt tears spring to her own eyes. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I am fairly certain. I have all the signs my mother described." Lucas crossed to where she sat and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "A baby, our baby. Beatrice, this is wonderful." "You are happy then?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Lucas said, leaning forward to kiss her tenderly. "You have given me everything. A home, love, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve this, but I am grateful every day." They visited Doc Howell in town the following week, who confirmed Beatrice's pregnancy. The baby would come sometime in late June or early July, he estimated. Lucas immediately began worrying about everything that could go wrong, about making sure Beatrice did not work too hard, about whether he would be a good father. Beatrice weathered his concern with patience and gentle humor. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I am strong, and Doc Howell has delivered dozens of healthy children. Everything will be fine." Mrs. Harrington and the neighbor women rallied around Beatrice, offering advice and sharing their own pregnancy stories. Sarah Fletcher brought by clothing her own children had outgrown. Martha Chen taught Beatrice to knit, and she spent winter evenings making tiny sweaters and blankets while Lucas read aloud from whatever book they were sharing. Winter turned to spring, and Beatrice's belly swelled with their growing child. Lucas was endlessly fascinated by it, would place his hand on her stomach and wait to feel the baby kick. The first time he felt it, his face lit up with such wonder that Beatrice fell in love with him all over again. "That is our child in there," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Our son or daughter." "I hope he or she has your kindness," Beatrice said, covering his hand with hers, "and your strength." "I hope they have your courage," Lucas replied, "your heart." As Beatrice's due date approached, Lucas became increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, took over most of the heavy household work, and worried constantly. Tom Fletcher and the other neighbors teased him good-naturedly about it, but they all understood. Losing a parent early, as Lucas had, made him acutely aware of how precious and fragile life could be. In late June, on a hot afternoon when the air shimmered with heat, Beatrice felt the first contractions. Lucas rode immediately for Doc Howell and Mrs. Harrington, his heart in his throat. By the time he returned with them, Beatrice's labor was well underway. The hours that followed were the longest of Lucas's life. He waited outside with Tom Fletcher, who had come to offer support, pacing and praying and trying not to imagine the worst. Inside, Beatrice labored with Doc Howell and Mrs. Harrington attending her, the pain intense but manageable. She thought about her mother, who had done this twice, and drew strength from that legacy of women who had endured and survived. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a baby's cry split the air. Lucas froze, waiting until Mrs. Harrington opened the door with a broad smile. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy, strong son, and Beatrice is doing fine." Lucas rushed inside to find Beatrice propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he entered, tears streaming down her face. "Lucas, come meet your son." He approached slowly, reverently, hardly daring to breathe. When Beatrice pulled back the blanket, he saw a small red face, eyes squeezed shut, tiny fists waving. His son. His and Beatrice's child. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, reaching out a finger to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby gripped his finger reflexively, and Lucas felt something fundamental shift in his chest. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked, watching Lucas with their son. Lucas thought of his father, who had taught him everything about ranching and integrity and love. "What about William? William Sawyer. We could call him Will." "William Sawyer," Beatrice repeated, smiling. "I love it. Hello, Will. Welcome to your home." Doc Howell checked them both over once more, declared them healthy, and took his leave along with Mrs. Harrington, who promised to return the next day to check on them. Tom Fletcher congratulated Lucas heartily before riding home to share the news with Sarah. Finally, Lucas and Beatrice were alone with their son. Lucas sat carefully on the edge of the bed, watching as Beatrice nursed the baby for the first time. The sight of his wife and child together filled him with an emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to tears. "Are you all right?" Beatrice asked softly, noticing his expression. "I am more than all right," Lucas said, his voice rough with feeling. "I was just thinking about that day at the depot, how close I came to not crossing the street, not offering to help, how different everything would be if I had not." "But you did," Beatrice reminded him. "You saw someone who needed help and you offered it. That is who you are, Lucas. That is why I love you." "I am the lucky one," Lucas insisted. "You were left at that depot again and again, and somehow that led you to me. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." Beatrice reached out with her free hand, and Lucas took it, holding tight to his family. "We are both lucky. We found each other when we both needed it most, and look what we have built." Little Will finished nursing and fell asleep in Beatrice's arms, his tiny face peaceful. Lucas carefully took him, cradling his son against his chest, marveling at how something so small could contain such enormous possibility. He walked slowly around the room, swaying gently, whispering promises to this new life. "I will teach you everything I know," he murmured. "How to work the land, how to treat people with respect, how to be strong and gentle at the same time. And your mother, she will teach you about courage and resilience and what it means to build a home from nothing. We will love you and protect you and do our best by you, I promise." Beatrice watched them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was her family. This ranch, this man, this child. After all the loneliness and disappointment, after being left waiting and forgotten, she had found her place. She had built a life worth living. The first months with Will were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. He was a good baby, healthy and strong like his father, but he kept them up many nights with his crying. Lucas would pace the floor with him while Beatrice got snatches of sleep, singing old songs his father had sung to him. During the day, Beatrice would wear Will in a sling while she worked, keeping him close. The ranch continued to thrive. Lucas hired a young man named Peter Grant to help with the heavy work, which gave him more time with his family. They expanded their cattle operation slightly and improved their irrigation system. The garden produced bountifully under Beatrice's care, and she began selling preserves and honey in town for extra income. As Will grew from infant to toddler, the house rang with his laughter. He was a curious, adventurous child who kept them constantly on their toes. Lucas taught him about the animals, letting him feed chickens and pet the gentler horses. Beatrice read to him every night, instilling in him her love of stories and learning. When Will was 2 years old, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was not working quite as hard with Peter helping around the ranch. In the spring of 1876, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, after Lucas's grandmother who had made the quilts. Grace was different from Will from the start, quieter and more observant. She would lie in her cradle watching everything with serious eyes, taking in the world around her. Will was fascinated by his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from feeding to changing her clothes. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. They added onto the house, building a proper nursery and expanding the kitchen. Lucas's reputation as an honest rancher and good neighbor grew, and he was eventually elected to the local cattlemen's association. Beatrice became known for her preserves and her kindness, always ready to help a neighbor in need. Will grew into a capable boy who loved working alongside his father, learning everything he could about ranching. Grace was quieter but equally determined, with a gift for animals that amazed both her parents. When she was 5, she found an injured hawk and nursed it back to health, releasing it once it could fly again. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas and Beatrice sat on their porch watching the sunset, Will and Grace playing in the yard before them. A decade had passed since that day at the depot, since Lucas had crossed the street and offered Beatrice a choice. So much had changed, yet the core of what they had built together remained constant. You ever think about how different things could have been? Beatrice asked, leaning against Lucas's shoulder. Sometimes, Lucas admitted. If Gerald had actually shown up that third time, if I had not been in town that day, if you had said no to my offer. So many small moments that could have changed everything. But they did not, Beatrice said, taking his hand. We found each other, we built this life together, and I would not change a single thing. Not even the hard parts. Lucas asked, thinking of the difficult first year, of the times they had struggled with money or worry or simply the exhaustion of building something from nothing. Not even those, Beatrice confirmed. The hard parts made us stronger, made us appreciate what we have. Will ran up to the porch, breathless and excited. Papa, I saw a coyote by the north fence. Can we go check it out before bedtime, after dinner? Lucas promised, ruffling his son's hair. And only if your mother says it is all right. Please, Mama. Will asked, turning his hopeful eyes on Beatrice. If you help Grace clean up after dinner and get ready for bed without fussing, then yes, Beatrice said, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. Will whooped and ran back to tell Grace, who was building something elaborate out of sticks and stones. Lucas pulled Beatrice closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For taking a chance on a lonely rancher. For building this life with me. For our children and our home and everything we have become together. For not giving up when things were hard. For loving me. Beatrice turned to kiss him properly, a soft press of lips that still made her heart race after 10 years. Thank you for seeing me. For asking if I wanted a home when I had nowhere else to go. For being the man I did not even know I was looking for. For this beautiful life we have built. They sat together as the sun sank lower, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant colors. Inside the house, their home, dinner waited to be served. Their children played in the yard, healthy and happy. The ranch stretched out around them, productive and peaceful. Everything they had worked for, everything they had built together, was right there in that moment. As darkness fell, and the stars began to emerge, Lucas and Beatrice called the children inside. They shared a meal together, the 4 of them around the table that had once been set for one lonely man. They laughed and talked and made plans for the next day, for the future that stretched out before them bright with possibility. After the children were in bed, Lucas and Beatrice retreated to their own room. They made love slowly, with the comfort and passion of two people who knew each other completely, who had weathered storms and celebrated joys together, who had chosen each other every day for 10 years, and would continue choosing each other for all the years to come. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Beatrice thought about the girl she had been, standing at that depot with her single trunk, feeling forgotten and lost. She could hardly reconcile that person with who she was now. A wife, a mother, a partner in building something lasting. The journey from there to here had not been easy, but it had been worth every difficult step. "I love you," she whispered to Lucas, who was nearly asleep. "I love you too," he murmured back, pulling her closer. Always. The years continued to unfold with their share of joys and challenges. When Will was 14, he helped Lucas successfully negotiate a major cattle contract that secured their financial stability for years to come. Grace, at 12, began training horses with such skill that neighboring ranchers started bringing their difficult animals to her. They added a third child to their family, another daughter named Rose, when Beatrice was 35. It was unexpected, this late blessing, but welcomed with open arms. Will and Grace doted on their baby sister, and Rose grew up surrounded by love and laughter. There were hard times too. A drought year that tested their resources and resolve. The death of Mrs. Harrington, who had become like a mother to Beatrice. Lucas's old injury from a fall during that first drought year that ached in cold weather. But they weathered it all together, their love and commitment deepening with each challenge overcome. As Lucas approached 50, he began teaching Will more about running the ranch, preparing him to eventually take over. It was not that Lucas was ready to stop working, but he wanted his son to be ready when the time came. Will proved himself capable and thoughtful, with his own ideas about how to improve and expand their operation. Grace, meanwhile, had become the finest horse trainer in the territory. She had a gift for understanding animals that went beyond simple skill, an intuition that allowed her to work with even the most difficult horses. She was courted by several young men, but she was in no hurry to marry, content with her work and her family. One evening, as Lucas and Beatrice sat on their porch watching another Arizona sunset, Will came to them with news. He had proposed to Emma Fletcher, Tom and Sarah's daughter, and she had accepted. Lucas and Beatrice were delighted. They had watched Will and Emma grow up together, had seen the friendship between them slowly deepen into love. The wedding was held at the ranch, with what seemed like half the territory in attendance. It was a joyous celebration, and as Lucas danced with Beatrice at the reception, he thought about their own wedding nearly 20 years earlier. "Look at what we started," he said, gesturing to the celebration around them. "Our son, getting married on the land we built together." "It is perfect," Beatrice agreed, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Everything we hoped for and more." Will and Emma built a house on the ranch property, expanding the operation into a true family enterprise. Within a year, they welcomed Lucas and Beatrice's first grandchild, a boy named Thomas after Emma's father. Holding his grandson for the first time, Lucas felt the circle of life completing in the most satisfying way. Grace eventually fell in love with a veterinarian named Daniel Morrison, who came to Hallbrook to open a practice. He appreciated her gift with animals and shared her passion for them. They married when Grace was 25, and Daniel joined the ranch operation, providing medical care for all the animals in the area. They gave Lucas and Beatrice 2 more grandchildren, twin girls named Alice and Clara. Rose, the youngest, proved to have Beatrice's sharp mind and love of learning. When she was 16, Beatrice and Lucas arranged for her to attend a teacher's college in Flagstaff, wanting to give her opportunities they had not had themselves. Rose thrived there and eventually returned to Holbrook to teach at the local school, bringing education and enlightenment to a new generation. As Lucas and Beatrice entered their 60s, they began to slow down, letting their children take over more of the daily operations. But they remained vital and engaged, enjoying their grandchildren and the life they had built. The ranch had grown from Lucas's modest operation into a thriving family enterprise that employed several people and was respected throughout the territory. On their 30th anniversary, the family organized a celebration at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with neighbors and friends from throughout the region. As Lucas and Beatrice stood together, surrounded by the fruits of their love and labor, they reflected on the incredible journey they had shared. 30 years, Beatrice said, shaking her head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you offered me a job at this ranch. Other times it feels like I have always been here, like I was always meant to be here. You were always meant to be here, Lucas said firmly, taking both her hands in his. The moment I saw you at that depot, something in me knew. I did not understand it then, but I do now. You were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours. Everything else was just details. Will stood to make a toast, his own son balanced on his hip. To my parents who taught me what love looks like, what commitment means, what it takes to build something lasting. You gave us not just a home, but an example of how to live with integrity and purpose. We are all grateful for that foundation. Grace added her own words. You taught me to be strong and gentle at the same time, to value people and animals equally, to work hard but also to love fully. Everything good in my life stems from the example you set. Rose, always the most eloquent, spoke last. Mama, you were left waiting at a depot by a man who did not deserve you. Papa, you were lonely on a ranch that felt too big and too empty. You found each other in that difficult moment and built something beautiful. You showed me that life does not have to be perfect to be wonderful. That true love is not about grand gestures, but about showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again. Thank you for that gift. Beatrice was crying openly now, and Lucas's eyes were suspiciously bright. They raised their glasses along with everyone else, toasting to love and family and the incredible life they had built together. As the celebration continued around them, Lucas pulled Beatrice close and whispered in her ear, "Do you remember what I asked you that night after the barn dance? You asked me if I wanted a home with you," Beatrice replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And you said yes," Lucas continued. "Best decision I ever made asking that question. Best decision you ever made saying yes." "I would say yes again," Beatrice told him, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "Every day I would say yes. You gave me everything, Lucas. A home, a family, a purpose, a love that has sustained me through everything. I am so grateful I was left at that depot, so grateful you saw me standing there and decided to cross the street." They kissed, surrounded by their family and the life they had created, and it felt like a renewal of vows, a recommitment to the journey they had been walking together for 3 decades. As Lucas and Beatrice moved into their 70s, they became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included not just their children and grandchildren, but the many people whose lives they had touched over the years. The ranch continued to thrive under Will's management, with input and support from Grace and her husband Daniel. They spent their days enjoying simpler pleasures now. Beatrice tended a smaller garden, teaching her granddaughters the secrets of growing things. Lucas worked with the horses when his body allowed, passing on his knowledge to whoever would listen. They read together in the evenings, just as they always had, and talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence between words. One afternoon, as they sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard, Lucas took Beatrice's hand and said, "I want you to know something. If I had to live my whole life over, I would not change a single moment. Not the hard times, not the losses, nothing. Because it all led me to you, to this life we built together. You are my home, Beatrice. You always have been." Beatrice squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears. "And you are mine. You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me a choice when I had none. You loved me when I felt unlovable. Everything good in my life comes from the moment you decided to cross that street in Holbrook and talk to a woman who had been left behind one too many times." They sat together as the sun set, as it had set thousands of times over their years together. The ranch hummed with life around them, multiple generations working and playing and loving on the land they had built. Holbrook had grown from a small frontier town into an established community, but the ranch remained a constant, a testament to what could be built through hard work and deep love. Lucas and Beatrice lived into their 80s, remarkably healthy and vital until the end. They passed within 6 months of each other, Lucas going first in his sleep one winter night, and Beatrice following the next summer, her body simply deciding it was time to join her beloved husband. Their children mourned them deeply, but also celebrated the incredible life they had lived, the example they had set, the love they had shared. At their joint memorial service, held at the ranch they had built together, Rose read from one of her mother's journals, a passage Beatrice had written on their 20th anniversary. "I used to think being left at that depot was the worst thing that could happen to me. I thought it meant I was forgettable, unwanted, destined to be alone. But now I understand it differently. I had to be left there 3 times so I would be standing there on the exact day Lucas was in town. At the exact moment he looked across the street and saw me. Every disappointment, every heartbreak, every moment I spent waiting for someone who did not deserve me led me to the man who did. Led me to this life, this family, this home. I would go through it all again, would stand at that depot 100 times, if it meant ending up here with him, with all of this. That is what love is. Not avoiding the hard parts, but walking through them to get to something beautiful on the other side." There was not a dry eye in the gathering as Rose finished reading. The service concluded with stories and laughter, remembering the couple who had started with nothing but hope and built an empire of love. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each adding their own chapter to the story Lucas and Beatrice had begun. But the heart of it remained the same: hard work, integrity, family, and above all, the kind of deep, abiding love that weathers every storm and emerges stronger. In Holbrook, the old train depot where Beatrice had waited 3 times eventually closed, replaced by more modern transportation. But the story lived on, passed down through the Sawyer family and the community. It became a legend of sorts, the tale of the woman who was left behind and the cowboy who finally asked if she wanted a home with him. Young couples would hear it and be inspired. Older couples would remember it and recommit to their own partnerships. And on the ranch, in the house that Lucas and Beatrice had built together, their descendants continued to live and love and work the land. The bedroom where they had shared 30 years of marriage, where their children had been born, where they had laughed and cried and dreamed together, became a place of honor. Will and Emma eventually moved into it, then Will's son, each generation adding to the legacy but honoring the foundation. The quilts Beatrice had used, made by Lucas's grandmother, were carefully preserved and passed down, used for special occasions and new babies. The table where Lucas and Beatrice had shared thousands of meals remained in the kitchen, scarred with use but still sturdy. The land itself bore the marks of their labor and love. Every fence post and irrigation ditch a testament to what they had built together. Years turned to decades, and the story of Lucas and Beatrice Sawyer became part of the fabric of Holbrook's history. The depot where they met was long gone, but a small plaque marked the spot, telling the story of the woman who was left waiting and the man who offered her something better than promises. A real home, honest work, and eventually, a love that lasted a lifetime. Their great-great-grandchildren would visit that plaque and hear the story, learning about the courage it took for Beatrice to say yes to an uncertain future, about the kindness it took for Lucas to offer her a choice, about the work and commitment it took to build something lasting. They learned that love is not always immediate or obvious, that sometimes it grows slowly from small acts of kindness and daily choices to show up and be present. The legacy Lucas and Beatrice left was not just land or money or a successful ranch, though they left all of those things. Their true legacy was the example they set, the proof they provided that real love exists, that it is worth waiting for, worth working for, worth fighting for. They showed that being left behind can sometimes be the best thing that ever happened if it leads you to where you are truly meant to be. And so the story endures, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are simply clearing the path for the best. That being forgotten by the wrong person makes room for being remembered by the right one. That a chance encounter at a depot, a simple question asked with genuine care, can change the course of not just two lives but countless lives that follow. Lucas Sawyer saw a woman who needed help and crossed the street. Beatrice Jones took a leap of faith with a stranger who offered her dignity when she felt she had none left. Together, they built a home, raised a family, created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They proved that happy endings are not just for fairy tales, that real love does exist, that home is not just a place but a person, a choice, a commitment renewed every single day. In the end, Beatrice was left at the depot 3 times so she could be there the 4th time, when Lucas Sawyer walked across that dusty street in Holbrook, Arizona, and changed both their lives forever. She was left behind so she could be found. And when Lucas finally asked, "Do you want a home with me?" Beatrice's yes echoed through the generations, a testament to the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the beauty of two people choosing to build something lasting together. Their story became legend, but it started as something simple. 2 lonely people finding each other at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, and having the courage to see what they could build together. That was their true gift to the world, the proof that love, real love, is always worth the wait, always worth the risk, always worth everything.